There's always at least one crazy overpowered artifact mod every single season. This season it was Lightning Strikes twice, and last season was Classy Restoration. PvP players absolutely hate them, and I gotta say it's with good reason. But that got me thinking, would it be possible for the 21 most powerful seasonal mods in Destiny 2's history to become permanent additions to the game? I've combed through every seasonal mod in existence to find the best ones. Many of these you might not even remember, but I think almost every one of these could be made permanently available with just a few tweaks. If I worked at Bungie, here's how I would bring these back. Let's start with the single most overpowered mod of each of the 3.0 seasons. Classy Restoration from Season 17 is a mod that will probably get a lot of hate in the comment section. I would guess that many of you probably want this mod to be permanently thrown into the Destiny content vault.
Fatality.
When you would activate your solar class ability, you'd also gain the Restoration buff, which would heal you over time. Starting in Season 19, one stack of Restoration gives 20 health per second and 32.5 health for every 2 stacks in the Crucible. In PvE, that's 40 health and 65 health per second respectively. This effect lasts for 7 seconds in PvE and 3 seconds in PvP. Free healing is always strong, but what makes this mod so broken is how quickly you can get your class ability back. On Hunter and Titan, you can almost get your ability cooldown back just by the time the Restoration ends. With this mod, you'd have nearly infinite Restoration uptime, or at the very least, you'd have it for every major engagement. But since it was removed at the end of Season 17, the only way that Hunters can proc Restoration is with a healing grenade. To bring it back, first of all, I think maybe this just shouldn't work in PvP and only be a PvE exclusive effect. But if it had to come back and work everywhere, I would add a significant increase to the class ability cooldown timer whenever you equip this mod. It should also cap out the Restoration timer so it can't be extended by your build. Going back to Season 16, the best mod hands down was Volatile Flow. When you'd pick up a Void Elemental well, all of your Void weapons would have volatile rounds. These bullets would place a volatility debuff on enemies, which would then explode with enough hits for some huge AoE damage. Volatile explosions aren't nearly as devastating as the Solar 3.0 ignitions. You get a bunch of mini detonations rather than a single massive explosion. For PvE, this made every Void 3.0 build really fun. If you missed that season or don't remember, basically every single build had never-ending volatile rounds and Devour active. Ad clear was faster than ever, and every kill healed you and gave you ability energy. It was a non-stop cycle that made PvE content really fun, but maybe a bit too easy. If the Volatile Flow mod was added back to the game, I think it would need a higher cost and maybe a reduced duration timer. It also shouldn't reset the Echo of Instability's fragment timer. Volatile Flow gave you volatile rounds for 17 seconds, but Echo of Instability is only for 10 seconds. But you could stack the two for a total of 27 seconds of volatility, which was just crazy. In Season 18, the most powerful artifact mod is Lightning Strikes twice. After using your arc grenade, your base grenade regen speed is 150% for 5 seconds. Any arc kill that you get while this buff is active increases that duration by 3 seconds, capping out at a massive 20 seconds. If you've watched my video on the best Arc 3.0 builds, Lightning Strikes twice gives Titans basically infinite storm grenades. Each class can use this mod for some really high uptime grenade builds. What makes this so overpowered is how much grenade spam it adds to Destiny. In PvE, you can almost completely ignore using your weapons and just use your abilities. And in PvP, we saw how oppressive playing against these grenades can be. Storm grenades with a large area of effect would track towards you for way too long. It felt like you were running for your life pretty much forever. To better balance out this mod, I think that the max duration needs to be cut at least in half. Instead of being able to extend the timer to 20 seconds, it should cap down to 10. Bungie has already said that they're most likely going to tune storm grenades pretty soon separately. Before we get to the next mod, I wanted to tell you guys a quick little story. So I've been on the hunt lately to replace my t-shirts because honestly they're getting kind of ratty and a little bit embarrassing. And I was talking to my brother recently who really liked this new brand called True Classic. So I reached out to them and had them send me a pack of t-shirts, which I've been trying for the past few days, and I gotta say these are like my favorite new t-shirts in the whole world. They're super soft and a little bit stretchy, so they just fit really well, particularly around your arms. And probably my favorite part is that they're really long. So I don't know if you guys have ever had this problem, but if you ever sit in a chair and you kind of accidentally give people a show because your t-shirt's not quite long enough, you never have to worry about that with these particular t-shirts because their back is like really long. They come with a lot of different colors, so no matter what you're into, I bet you'll probably find something that you like. And in particular, they have a blend that's made for the gym that's kind of like a spandex polyester material, and I really like those. I think I'm gonna buy a whole bunch of those to replace all my workout gear as well. These t-shirts are really affordably priced, and so far they've washed really well. They've barely shrank at all, and they really have held up well after a number of washes. If you want to try them out for yourself, you can check out my link in the description. It's trueclassictees.com/pattycakes. Thanks again to True Classic Tees for sponsoring the video, and let's get back to the next mod. Next up is a mod from Season of the Worthy 2.5 years ago. If Classy Restoration seems a bit too overpowered for you, then this is the more balanced version that you might like. Soul of the Praxic Fire gave you an overshield whenever you activated your solar class ability. In exchange, it would double that cooldown timer for the class ability. So for example, if your Hunter mobility stat made your dodge cooldown 20 seconds, Soul of the Praxic Fire would extend that timer to 40 seconds. This was a much more balanced version of Classy Restoration. Honestly, I don't think anything would really need to change that much for this one to come back. It's definitely strong, but it doesn't power creep the game nearly as hard as Classy Restoration, and if it did need to be changed, I think Bungie could just tweak the strength of the overshield to make it work. I would also definitely want to see that the class ability cooldown timer would stack with Classy Restoration, so you need to face some big trade-offs if you want to run both of these mods. Speaking of overshields, this next mod gives one for the Arc subclasses. You probably hate the idea of Arc Battery almost as much as Classy Restoration, but hear me out. For those of you who didn't play back in Season 7, Arc Battery granted an overshield whenever you used your Arc class ability. It was basically the Arc version of Soul of the Praxic Fire. This felt especially overpowered when hunters would combine it with a Wormhouse Crown exotic helmet and the old bottom tree Arc Strider where you get damage resistance anytime you started dodging. With all this combined, you were nearly unkillable while dodging, and you could even tank a golden gunshot. Originally, Arc Battery had no downsides, but then Bungie made it work the same way as the Soul of the Praxic Fire by extending that class ability timer. To bring this mod back into the game, I think we need to be really careful about the amount of overshield it provides. I'd really like to see both Arc Battery and Soul of the Praxic Fire come back for PvE builds. They were both great options for players who need a little bit of help staying alive in those higher incoming damage scenarios. Next up is the infamous duo to Arc Battery that let us one-shot melee everyone in the Crucible. Thunder Coil grants bonus damage for all Arc melee abilities and refunds super energy on Finisher final blows. For Titans with Knockout activated, any melee would kill a full health Guardian in PvP. You could basically run through a team with instant kills that heal you back to full health. In no universe do I think this should be a thing for PvP again, but I would like to see it as a mod for PvE. Arc 3.0 is clearly the most melee-centered subclass, but it doesn't feel like you have a whole lot of build depth. There's so many different ways to build into your grenade ability, but a lot less for your melee. The main thing missing from melee-focused power fantasy is just having more damage output, or at least more melees that deal a lot of area of effect damage. I think the Liar's Handshake Hunter with melees chaining Jolt to multiple targets is a really good example. Adding more damage to Arc melees would make them feel a lot better against more tanky enemies. I think Arc 3.0 Warlocks especially suffer from this. Fortunately, Thunder Coil is a really easy mod to balance. The only change you'd really need to make is for Arc melee damage to only be buffed against PvE combatants. As long as it doesn't work in PvP, we're good to go. Focusing Lens increases the damage that light-based subclass abilities deal against targets that are affected by stasis. At one point, this buffed all weapon damage for anyone who is standing in a Well of Radiance. You can imagine how broken it was for everyone to stack an extra 25% more damage on top of the Well's buff. After the nerf, the main strategy was to either use the Revenant Hunter Super or the Shadebinder Warlock Stasis turrets, because both of these options easily applied stasis to the target, and then everyone else would use their light-based super to kill the boss. Balancing Focusing Lens would be a little bit tricky. I think the best thing to do is probably to make it a debuff instead of a buff. Making it a debuff would add it to the list of all the other debuffs in the game. Whichever debuff is the strongest gets applied to the target. So you would need to decide between giving up a DPS super so you can get this debuff, or using a less powerful debuff and then having another super for DPS. To me, this sounds exactly like the type of trade-off that Bungie's wanting us to make. While we're talking about debuff effects, Particle Deconstruction was another incredibly good mod for endgame PvE. When dealing damage to a combatant with a fusion rifle or a linear fusion rifle, you get bonus damage for a short time. This debuff only applies to damage from your fusion rifle or your linear fusion rifle. We saw the power of this mod with the Vex Mythic class, rapid fire fusions, and LFRs, but in these days only really LFRs are found in the DPS meta. Converting this mod to be a debuff would greatly benefit the overall game balance, just like I mentioned with Focusing Lens. They'd all be fighting in the ever-growing list of debuffs in Destiny where the most powerful one gets applied. To me, this would open up a lot of variety for different build options without adding too much power creep to the game. While using a grenade launcher, Breach and Clear provides a 30% debuff by dealing damage to a boss or champion, or by breaking a combatant's shield. It's a debuff that lasts for 10 seconds and also reloads your stowed weapon. Breach and Clear is an extremely powerful debuff. 30% places it up at the top of the debuff list, and the competition doesn't even auto-load your other weapons for you. Just like the other debuffs on this list, it would be best balanced by reducing the debuff's percentage. Since this is a lower investment compared to the Night Stalker's Tether Super or a Divinity, it should be less impactful. And with Breach and Clear being on the global list of debuffs in the game, it's also more balanced by being completely overridden by the stronger debuffs. This would open up some build diversity without adding more power creep. Suppressive Darkness returning would allow more flexibility in Void 3.0 builds. This mod weakens targets with a 30% debuff whenever you suppress them. All Void 3.0 subclasses have access to the Echo of Undermining fragment. This fragment applies a 30% weaken debuff to enemies hit by a Void Grenade that lasts for 5 seconds. When Suppressive Darkness isn't in the game, you can still use the Suppression Grenade to apply weaken, but if we had access to Suppressive Darkness again, we could swap our Echo of Undermining for another fragment. Titans have no other way to apply Weaken without a grenade. Warlocks can use Child of the Old Gods or the Fellwinter's Helm, and Hunters actually have 3 options. Any Titan that wants to build into more of a support role that debuffs the targets feels pretty restrictive. And Suppressive Darkness already has a high cost of 7 energy, and it requires a specific grenade, so I think it's fairly balanced as is. The last debuff on our list is Sundering Glare, which is a 20% debuff after landing multiple precision hits against distant targets. It's already pretty well balanced, and I don't think it needs any major changes to become a permanent addition to the game. First of all, it's only a 20% debuff. It also requires multiple precision shots back to back, which can be pretty challenging for players who are getting flinched by enemies. The target also needs to be at least 40 meters away from you, so bosses like Rolk or Golgoroth are pretty much unaffected. It currently has a weird effect that overrides any other debuff though. You could have Tether's 30% debuff on Oryx active, but then if Sundering Glare procs, its 20% debuff is what's used. This is a really weird interaction since the highest debuff is always supposed to be the top priority. I would definitely want to see this get fixed before it was added back to the game. I love Sundering Glare for Grandmaster Nightfalls in particular because most of the time you're going to be playing in the back of the room anyway, and that extra damage is really nice on bosses and champions. Next up is a mod that's really powerful for Solar and Stasis Elemental well builds. Fire and Ice spawns a random array of Solar and Stasis welds whenever you defeat a champion. Right now, I think most people would say grenades are far superior to melee abilities, but only Solar 3.0 can easily make Solar wells. With this mod though, you can make a Void 3.0 Devour build or actually give Arc 3.0 and Stasis some healing. I think this mod doesn't really need to be balanced too much to come back. It only works well in content with a lot of champions. Now that swords have been nerfed a few times, I think it's safe to make Passive Guard a permanent mod in Destiny. This reduces the incoming damage from combatants that are close to you while you're wielding a sword. It's a very noticeable damage reduction. Without it, using a sword in life-threatening PvE content feels pretty dangerous. I don't think we need to make too many changes with this mod to make it balanced. If damage resistance seems a bit too strong considering all the other sources for DR in the game, there's a pretty easy fix. Just change the mod to only give you damage resistance for a few seconds after switching to your sword. This would add a bit of skill gap back to the game by cycling through your weapons more often and paying attention to the timer. This next mod is really fun with elemental well builds. Well of Potency gives you super energy back whenever you pick up a matching elemental well. This is really strong now that there's so many different ways to spawn a lot of elemental wells. In fact, I've made a few really fun builds you can try out with Arc 3.0 that take advantage of these. I'll link the video in the description. These wells already give ability energy back whenever you pick them up by default. It's 10% per ability if the well matches your subclass, and otherwise it's just 10% for the ability with the lowest overall energy. What makes this mod pretty well balanced is that there's already limitations on the amount of wells that you can make. You need to heavily invest into mods that create them, and using Well of Potency will cost you a slot. You'll need to choose between other mods that give you benefits when you pick up a well, or you'll need to sacrifice a mod that makes wells. Either way, there's give and take, which makes it an easy mod for Bungie to add. Plus, wells don't exist in PvP, so there's no trouble to be created over in the Crucible. Lucent Finisher spawns heavy ammo for you or your allies whenever you finish a champion or a Lucent Hive Lightbearer. This is a really strong mod because it basically replaces those 3 Aeon Cult exotics. To balance it and not have it step on the Aeon exotics so heavily, I would change it so that you only create heavy ammo for yourself. This way, there's still a reason to keep those Aeon options open for group play, but for individual activities like Lost Sectors, you'll have some extra build options and still have a reliable way to earn heavy ammo that's not dependent on getting lucky with RNG. Impulse Recycler gives you grenade energy back from landing grenade final blows. Multiple copies of the mod actually increase the amount of energy that you gain. This mod is very similar to Lightning Strikes Twice at the beginning of the video. Instead of only working with arc grenades though, any subclass can use this mod. You can probably tell immediately from looking at gameplay that this mod is not nearly as powerful as Lightning Strikes Twice. That mod provides a buff with a timer that can extend itself all the way up to 20 seconds. Impulse Recycler only fits into the glove mod slot too, so you'd need to choose between this mod and champion mods or any other ability regen mods like Impact Induction or Grenade Kickstart. As far as I can tell, it provides about 20% grenade energy per kill when you stack 2 of the mods together. But of course, running them together would also mean that you can't run any champion mods on non-Artifice gloves. So it would be nice to see this move over to a different mod slot with less competition for the useful mods. Next up is Guardian Angel, which is a mod that I think truly would fit in really well right now. It grants a chance to generate healing orbs on Scout Rifle, Sniper Rifle, Bow, and Linear Fusion Rifle precision final blows. This mod opens up flexibility to allow any class to play more of a support healer role, which is kinda similar to what you can do with Lumina. It has a very specific criteria to proc these healing orbs, so I think it's already pretty well balanced and it doesn't really need any major changes. As long as there's some sort of a cooldown between healing orb spawns so you can't make one every second, this would be a really cool mod to have back in the rotation for group play. In fact, I think this would actually pair really well together in a Solar 3.0 build with the next 2 mods on our list. Solar Fulmination buffs your ignitions, which causes them to do increased damage with a larger radius. With most Solar 3.0 builds, there's a bunch of different ways to make ignitions. Right now, I would say these ignitions are pretty well balanced. Their range and damage aren't instantly clearing rooms of enemies, but they still have enough impact to be really fun to use. With Solar Fulmination though, you can clear most enemy spawns instantly with just one ignition. To keep things a little bit more balanced, I would add it back to Destiny but only keep the increased radius. In most PvE content, ignitions are going to kill the red bars pretty easily anyway, but increasing the damage of the explosion to also kill those challenging enemies adds a little bit too much power creep. It was fun for a season, but I'm not sure if it makes sense for the game long term. Next up is Rays of Precision from Season 17. This was one of my favorite mods from that season because it also stacked with Solar Fulmination. While Radiant, every Solar Precision kill would cause ignitions. Solar Fulmination and Solar 3.0 fragments make these ignitions do way more damage in a larger area of effect. It's sort of like if one Dragonfly or one Firefly explosion destroyed every single enemy in a room. As someone that loves making explosions in PvE, I really want this one back. There was no cooldown for how often you could proc this effect, so you could get as many precision kills as you want while Radiant, and then all of them would ignite. Although this is a really powerful effect, it also means you're likely giving up some powerful elemental well mods to put it together. Rays of Precision by itself isn't all that strong, but when combined with Solar Fulmination, things get really crazy. As long as the cost to invest into these mods at the same time means giving up something equally strong in exchange, I think there's no real reason why we can't have both of them back in the game. I would certainly love to run this combo with my favorite ignition builds. This final mod isn't overpowered, but adding it back to the game might be the rebirth that Warmind cells really need. I bet some of you have never even seen a Warmind cell with how rare they are these days. These are large glowing orbs that provide some sort of an effect. Some deal damage over time like Scorch, some suppress like Void 3.0, and the Hammer of the Warmind mod stuns Overload and Unstoppable champions. As long as the champ's within the area of effect of the Warmind cell explosion, it's going to get stunned. Warmind cells have been nerfed so many times at this point that they haven't really been used by most players in many years. At one point, they ran the meta in PvE. You would spawn a Warmind cell in the middle of a room and then shoot it until it explodes, and it would kill every single enemy in the area almost automatically. If anything, Warmind cells could use a bit of a global buff to make them more relevant. Hammer of the Warmind would add a little bit of spice to champion content that's starting to feel really stale these days. Up next, check out my video on exotic armor choices that I think should be used a little bit more often. It's linked on screen and in the description.